1. Shock hooked, the room froze as Jordan Peterson leaned forward, his voice sharp and deliberate, slicing through the hum of conversation like a blade. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said with the authority of a man certain of his superiority, "you are unfit for the role you claim to hold." The words echoed with the weight of final judgment, and for a heartbeat, silence gripped the chamber. Every eye turned toward Jasmine Crockett. Gasps rippled like a current, and somewhere in the back, a nervous laugh died on someone's lips. That Peterson's smirk told the story he wanted to be written, another so-called victory in his long history of dismissals and takedowns. To him, it was a familiar script, the confident professor leveling his critique, expecting the audience to applaud the audacity. He leaned back, arms folded, savoring the hush he mistook for triumph. But that silence wasn't agreement. It was disbelief. It was outrage. It was the kind of pause that carried its own electricity, humming beneath the surface. People leaned forward, waiting, almost desperate to see how Crockett would respond. And yet, she didn't flinch. She didn't rush. Her stillness was a defiance of its own, a reminder that dignity does not stumble in the face of insult. The camera zoomed in, capturing the smirk of a man convinced he had cornered his opponent, and the quiet composure of a woman who seemed to know something no one else did. That contrast, arrogance reclining against dignity standing tall, was a story in itself. Headlines would later scream of this moment. Peterson calls Crockett unfit. But the truth is, those headlines missed the more important part. Because while his insult landed like a gavel of arrogance, it also signaled the beginning of his unraveling. The air was thick with anticipation, the audience suspended between Peterson's contempt and Crockett's calm. And though few realized it in that instant, history was pivoting. For beneath the surface of her silence, Crockett carried something Peterson never saw coming. Nobody in that room knew what Crockett had waiting in her hands. A single recording that would silence him, shift the ground beneath his argument, and prove, in the most undeniable way, that arrogance always collapses under the weight of truth. And as the chamber held its breath, the stakes of what was about to unfold only grew higher. Point 2. Raise the stakes to understand why this single insult mattered so much. You have to step back from the chamber and look at the clash of worlds that collided in that moment. On one side stood Jordan Peterson, a man whose lectures and viral interviews had earned him a global following. To his supporters, he was a truth-teller, a rebel against what he called political correctness, an intellectual warrior unafraid to say the things others only whispered. His reputation preceded him, not just in academic halls, but across continents. He had become a brand unto himself, a voice amplified by millions, his words printed on bookshelves and etched into debates across dinner tables. And on the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, a rising force in American politics, a woman whose very presence in Congress represented a new chapter in who gets to be seen, who gets to speak, and who gets to be heard. She carried into that room not just her own convictions, but the weight of countless stories. Immigrant families who dreamed, workers who toiled, young women who fought for their place in rooms where they were told they didn't belong. To dismiss her as unfit wasn't just a personal slight. It was a message aimed at every community she reflected, every sacrifice her rise embodied. That's why the silence after Peterson's insult wasn't ordinary. It was thick with outrage waiting to erupt. Because if he won the moment, if his arrogance crushed her dignity, it wouldn't just be Crockett who looked diminished. It would be every voice like hers, every story that mirrored her struggle. His words carried the danger of rewriting the narrative. Once again, the old guard silencing the new. Peterson thrived in those battles. He built his career on cornering his opponents, framing them as shallow or ill-prepared. And to many watching, it looked like the familiar playbook, another intellectual execution, another viral clip where Peterson's calm dismantled someone else's worth. But this time, the stakes were far higher than an academic debate. This was not a lecture hall. This was Congress. This was the floor where laws are shaped and lives are affected. And in that arena, arrogance didn't just bruise egos, it threatened justice itself. Crockett knew this. Her stillness wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. She understood that the fight unfolding wasn't about whether Jordan Peterson could score another rhetorical victory. It was about whether voices like hers could stand unbroken when the weight of arrogance tried to press them down. And that's exactly why she refused to back down. Because beneath Peterson's polished intellect and sharp delivery was something most of his admirers never questioned: his credibility. For years, he had been shielded by reputation, his words taken as authority, his arguments treated like scripture. But Crockett had done her homework. She carried with her not just passion, but proof. And in her hands was something even the sharpest debater couldn't twist away from: his own words, preserved in a recording that would expose the cracks in his armor. The chamber didn't know it yet, but the moment of Peterson's insult was the peak of his power in that room. From here, the ground beneath him would begin to shift. And as silence held, the smirk on his face masked the truth: that his credibility was not untouchable, and Crockett was about to reveal just how fragile it really was. What happened next would not only stun Peterson, but send shockwaves far beyond the walls of that chamber. 3. Antagonist backstory. To understand why Jordan Peterson's insult landed with such force, you need to understand the man himself, the reputation he built, the empire he commanded, and the pattern that made this confrontation feel, at first, like just another predictable chapter in his long-running playbook. Peterson rose to prominence not simply because he was smart. Many are smart, but because he knew how to wield intelligence like a weapon. His lectures were crisp, his cadence deliberate, and his ability to lace complex psychology with moral judgment made him magnetic. To students, he was a professor who spoke with clarity. To audiences online, he was a warrior against a changing world they didn't understand. His rise wasn't an accident. It was the product of sharp intellect combined with an even sharper instinct for theater. But brilliance, left unchecked, often curdles into arrogance. For Peterson, debates became more than exchanges of ideas. They became stages for conquest. He relished the role of dismantling opponents, often with a smirk, a scoff, or a carefully placed sigh that told his audience, "I am above this." And time after time, that performance worked. Viewers cheered as he made critics squirm, as he dismissed arguments with surgical precision. Clips of him outmaneuvering journalists or academics went viral not just because of what he said, but because of how he said it, with the swagger of a man convinced he could not be touched. Still, hidden beneath the spectacle were cracks. There were moments when his logic slipped, when his arguments wobbled under scrutiny. At times, he leaned less on evidence and more on force of personality. He'd pivot, deflect, or lean on a tone of authority that discouraged questions. Those who revered him never noticed, or chose not to. Those who challenged him often buckled under his confidence before the flaws could fully show. In the theater of debate, he rarely faced an opponent who refused to play by his script, and so a pattern took root. Peterson would walk into rooms expecting to dominate. He would size up his opponent, calculate the line that would rattle them, and deliver it with the precision of a practiced marksman. That line, sometimes sarcastic, sometimes venomous, was designed not just to win the argument, but to wound the person. He called it truth-telling. Others called it belittling. Whatever the label, it worked. For years, he played the role of intellectual giant unchallenged, towering above adversaries who either faltered or faded. But the very thing that built his reputation also fed the arrogance that blinded him. Because while his audiences roared and his reputation swelled, Peterson began to believe he could never be undone by his own words. He leaned on them like armor, forgetting that words, once spoken, can also be chains. And that's where Jasmine Crockett entered the story. Unlike others who faced him, she wasn't rattled by tone or intimidated by reputation. She came prepared, not just with conviction, but with evidence. She knew the pattern, she knew the performance, and she understood that the only way to expose arrogance was not to outshout it, but to let it trap itself. Peterson, in that chamber, believed he was playing the same old game. He thought he was leaning on a strategy that had worked 100 times before: deliver the cutting insult, watch the opponent shrink, bask in the applause of dominance. What he didn't know was that the script was already broken. Because this time, his words had not vanished into thin air. They had not been lost to memory or buried beneath applause. They had been preserved, captured in a recording that told a different story than the one he wanted the world to believe. That recording didn't come from him. It wasn't curated, clipped, or framed to suit his narrative. It was raw, undeniable, and dangerous. It carried the potential to unravel years of carefully cultivated credibility. And the person holding it was not an academic waiting to spar or a journalist scrambling for a headline. It was Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman with both the platform and the courage to use it. For Peterson, arrogance had always been an ally. In that moment, it became his enemy. Because what he dismissed as a simple insult, another routine dismissal in his long career of belittling others, was about to collide with the one thing arrogance cannot survive: the truth of its own contradictions. And what Peterson didn't realize, as he smirked and leaned back in his chair, was that this time, his words had already been recorded, and not by him. 4. Protagonist backstory. Long before Jasmine Crockett walked into that chamber, long before she sat across from Jordan Peterson with the calm of a woman ready to withstand whatever storm arrogance hurled her way, she was a daughter of working-class grit. Born into a family that understood struggle not as a theory but as daily reality, she knew the value of sacrifice early on. Her childhood was not gilded with privilege. It was built on the lessons of perseverance, of watching her family stretch every dollar, of seeing how dignity could be preserved even when resources were scarce. She carried those lessons like invisible armor. For Crockett, the journey toward law and eventually politics was never about prestige. It was about service. She saw injustice up close, communities dismissed, voices ignored, ordinary people crushed under systems that claimed to serve them. While others looked away, she leaned in. She listened. And when she finally had the tools, she fought back. Her path through law was not smoothed by insider connections or elite networks. She had to carve her way through long nights of study, through doors that often closed in her face, through the sneers of those who thought a young black woman from modest beginnings did not belong in the same rooms where power made its deals. Yet, with each obstacle, Crockett found fuel. Every no sharpened her determination. Every underestimation forged her resilience. As an attorney, she didn't chase the lucrative cases that padded bank accounts. She took the ones that mattered to people who had no one else. Tenants fighting landlords, workers fighting exploitation, citizens fighting to be heard. Her victories were not measured in dollar signs, but in lives changed, in dignity restored. Those cases earned her a reputation, not as someone who sought the spotlight, but as someone who wouldn't flinch when the stakes were high. When Crockett stepped into politics, she carried that same spirit of service. In Congress, her presence was itself a statement that America's story is not owned by the few, that leadership can rise from the grit of sacrifice, that the daughter of working-class roots could stand shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful voices in the nation. She didn't come to blend into the system. She came to challenge it, to represent the stories that so often went unheard. But in those halls, underestimation was constant. Critics scoffed at her outspokenness, mistaking conviction for recklessness. Opponents labeled her passion as anger, her resolve as stubbornness, her fearlessness as unfitness. Elites like Jordan Peterson looked at her not as an equal, but as an intruder in their arena, a woman whose presence disrupted the comfort of old hierarchies. To them, she was too bold, too direct, too unapologetic. But that is exactly why she resonated with so many beyond those walls. To the people who watched her rise, Crockett embodied something rare, representation that did not apologize for existing. Her identity was not a hurdle, but a beacon. She carried into her work the pride of community, the pride of heritage, the pride of knowing that the very qualities her critics dismissed were the ones her supporters cherished. She was not polished to fit elite expectations. She was authentic, grounded, and real. And in an era where arrogance so often masqueraded as intellect, that authenticity was her greatest strength. When Peterson called her unfit, the words cut differently. For her, it wasn't just another insult. It was the echo of every time she had been told she didn't belong, every time her worth had been dismissed by those who assumed their power was unshakable. But unlike the young girl hearing no at closed doors, Crockett was now a congresswoman, a fighter with years of experience standing her ground. She knew how to turn insult into fuel, how to let arrogance expose itself. Her story, her journey, her sacrifices, all of it built to this moment. Because the truth is, Crockett was never the kind of leader who silenced arrogance with more arrogance. She silenced it with proof, with resilience, with a composure that reminded her opponents that dignity was not weakness. It was the sharpest weapon of all. And that grit, That refusal to be silenced, that determination forged from childhood struggle, courtroom battles, and congressional fights, is exactly what she would summon when Peterson made his fatal mistake. The smirk he wore that day was not new to her. She had seen it on the faces of landlords who underestimated tenants, on the faces of employers who dismissed workers, on the faces of opponents who thought money or privilege would buy them victory. Every time, she had turned that arrogance into ashes. This time would be no different. The difference was simple. Crockett didn't just have the will. She had the evidence. And the recording she held would not only answer Peterson's insult, it would prove, once again, that underdogs who rise from sacrifice carry a power that arrogance will never understand. And so, as the chamber buzzed with the weight of his insult and her silence, Crockett's story carried her forward. A lifetime of being underestimated had prepared her for this exact stage. And the moment Peterson thought he had won was, in truth, the moment he had already lost. 5. Debate escalated. The silence after Peterson's first blow lingered like smoke, but he mistook it for surrender. Emboldened, he leaned forward again, his voice steady but sharper, every word designed to cut. "This isn't about personal offense," he said, drawing out the pause as if to savor the attention. "This is about standards. And by every measure, academic, professional, ethical, you are not qualified to sit in the position you occupy. You are not credible, you are not prepared, and you are, frankly, not fit to represent the people you claim to speak for." The words dropped like stones into water, rippling outward. The chamber shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded along, others stiffened with outrage, but all eyes returned to Crockett. Peterson's confidence grew with every second of her silence. He smelled blood in the water. He pressed harder. "What exactly are your qualifications? What experience entitles you to rewrite policy or challenge established truths? You ride on emotion, not intellect. You posture, but you do not persuade. At best, you are symbolic. At worst, you are dangerous." His cadence was rehearsed, the kind that had cornered countless opponents before. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had always won these exchanges, who expected his opponent to fumble under the weight of his precision. He knew how to rattle journalists, how to outflank academics, how to make adversaries look small with nothing more than a smirk and a rhetorical jab. And now, in his mind, he was dismantling Jasmine Crockett the same way, but she did not flinch. She didn't scramble for notes, didn't raise her voice, didn't even shift in her seat. Her calm was infuriating to him, unsettling to the audience. Her silence was louder than any interruption could have been. The crowd leaned in, waiting for her to crack. They expected a fiery retort, a burst of indignation, a defensive scramble to prove her worth. But Crockett didn't give them that. She sat in the storm of his accusations, her eyes steady, her posture unshaken. It was in that stillness that the power began to shift. Because the silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. She was letting him build his own stage, climb higher and higher on the scaffolding of arrogance, without realizing that every word he spoke was another plank laid for his own fall. Peterson, sensing he hadn't broken her yet, doubled down again. If dignity were enough, anyone could sit in your seat. But leadership requires more than presence. It requires mastery. And you, Congresswoman, have none. You are unfit to serve, and history will remember this. The last words hung heavy, and Peterson leaned back, his expression smug, his arms folded as though sealing the argument. He thought he had cornered her completely, stripped away her credibility, and left her with nothing but silence. But what looked like victory to him was, in fact, the quiet before the storm. Because Crockett wasn't silent out of defeat. She was silent because she knew she didn't need to argue. She only needed to wait for the right moment to reveal what she already held. The chamber couldn't feel it yet, but a shift was coming. His insults had reached their peak, his arrogance its limit. And in the very pause he believed he owned, Crockett was preparing to turn the entire exchange upside down. What Peterson didn't know, what no one in that room yet realized, was that his words would not remain his own. They would soon return to him, replayed in a way that stripped away the armor of his reputation. The tables were about to turn. 6. The mic drop counterattacked. For a long moment, Jasmine Crockett did nothing at all. She let the weight of Peterson's accusations hang heavy in the air, allowed his smug certainty, to echo against the chamber walls. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached for a small device resting on the desk before her. The subtle scrape of metal against wood cut through the silence. Heads turned. The energy in the room shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like the first tremor before an earthquake. Peterson's smirk faltered for the briefest second, as though his instincts detected a threat. He straightened in his chair, eyes narrowing, but said nothing. Crockett looked up, her gaze steady, her voice calm. "You've spoken a great deal about credibility, Dr. Peterson," she began, her words measured, almost soft. "But credibility isn't proven by how loudly one speaks. It's proven by consistency, by honesty, by truth." With that, she pressed play. A faint crackle of audio filled the chamber, grainy but clear enough to recognize the unmistakable cadence of Peterson's own voice. "Leadership," the recording began, "is not about credentials or titles. It is about service, about the willingness to sacrifice for others. Anyone who claims otherwise has already betrayed the people they're supposed to represent." The words echoed, and the chamber reacted instantly. Gasps broke out across the rows. A murmur rippled through the audience like a gust of wind rustling leaves. Faces turned, eyes widened, and even those who had nodded along with Peterson earlier now looked unsettled. Crockett paused the recording. She let the silence do its work. Then she spoke again, her tone even, unshaken. "That was your voice, Dr. Peterson. Your words. Words that stand in direct contradiction to what you just said here, moments ago, when you declared me unfit to serve because you dismissed my credentials, my history, my lived experience." Peterson shifted in his seat. His smirk had vanished entirely. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. His jaw tightened, his hand twitched against the desk, betraying the unraveling calm he was trying to preserve. Crockett continued, "You've built a reputation on calling out hypocrisy in others. But today, we see it laid bare in you. You say leadership isn't about titles, yet you attack me because you don't respect mine. You say leadership is about service, yet you dismiss the service I've given to the very people who sent me here. You say leadership is about sacrifice, yet you mock the sacrifices of families like mine who struggled so that someone like me could stand in this chamber at all." The room was no longer silent. It was alive with energy. Some leaned forward, eager to hear more. Others exchanged stunned glances, whispering in disbelief. Even those loyal to Peterson could not mask their discomfort. His own words, preserved and played back with precision, had become a mirror he could not escape. Crockett pressed play again. The recording continued. "Beware of those who confuse arrogance with intellect. They will always seek to belittle others, because belittling is the only way they can feel tall." This time, the chamber erupted. Gasps gave way to low laughter, incredulous chuckles at the irony of hearing Peterson, in his own voice, define himself so perfectly. A few shook their heads, muttering under their breath. The air was thick with disbelief, but also with a rising tide of validation. For Crockett, for what she represented, for every person who had ever been dismissed with the same arrogance Peterson had displayed, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or sneer. Her calm composure only deepened the impact. She waited for the noise to settle, then spoke with the clarity of someone who knew she didn't need to embellish the truth. "You see, Dr. Peterson, arrogance always believes it has the final word. But arrogance forgets that words live on. They don't disappear when the smirk fades or when the applause dies down. They remain. And today, your own words reveal exactly who you are." Peterson tried to respond then. He cleared his throat, leaned into the microphone, and began. But the stammer caught him off guard. His voice cracked slightly. He hesitated, searching for footing that no longer existed. Crockett didn't give him the lifeline. She continued, her voice unwavering. "You told this chamber I am unfit. But what truly makes someone unfit is not where they come from, or the sacrifices they've made, or the people they represent. What makes someone unfit is the inability to live by their own words. And in this moment, Dr. Peterson, your words condemn you." The chamber fell into a hush again, but this time it wasn't Peterson's silence commanding it. It was Crockett's truth resonating through the walls. The balance of power had shifted entirely. She didn't need to raise her voice. The recording had spoken louder than any rebuttal ever could. Peterson's face, told the story of a man watching his fortress crumble. The smirk was gone, replaced by a strained tightness. His eyes darted briefly toward the crowd, then back to the desk, as though searching for an escape that wasn't there. The certainty he had carried moments before had dissolved, leaving only the uncomfortable reality of his own contradictions. Crockett leaned back, her posture relaxed, her voice calm to the very end. The truth doesn't need volume. It doesn't need arrogance. It doesn't even need me to defend it. All it needs, she said, gesturing lightly toward the device, is a record. The chamber erupted again, some with applause, some with murmurs of awe, others with stunned silence that spoke louder than noise. Cameras zoomed in on Peterson's expression, his lips pressed thin, his eyes betraying the collapse of his composure. And then, Crockett delivered the final line. Not shouted, not dramatic, but quiet enough to sting with its simplicity. The chamber has heard your words, Dr. Peterson. Now it will remember mine. The moment hung suspended, as if the air itself refused to move. Peterson sat still, visibly rattled, his mouth opening and closing with no reply. The silence that followed was not his weapon anymore. It was hers. The chamber fell into silence. Peterson had nothing left to say. 7. The aftermath shockwaves that the moment Crockett pressed play, the chamber erupted, but the story didn't stay there. Within minutes, the confrontation had escaped the walls of Congress and exploded across social media. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag Crockett versus Peterson. Hashtag dignity over arrogance. Hashtag the recording. Clips of the exchange looped endlessly, shared by viewers horrified, exhilarated, or simply unable to believe what had just happened. Memes flooded timelines, some sharp with irony, others celebratory, all amplifying the narrative that a woman's composure and proof had dismantled the self-proclaimed master of debate. Commentators scrambled to cover it, their headlines reflecting the drama. Congresswoman Crockett silences Peterson with shocking evidence. Recording exposes hypocrisy. Peterson's own words used against him. From smirk to silence. How one woman turned the tables. The language was hyperbolic, yes, but it matched the moment. Social media accounts, podcasts, and news feeds all carried fragments of the event, each clip a magnifying glass on Peterson's faltering composure and Crockett's unshakable calm. Supporters rallied immediately. For many, Crockett had become more than a congresswoman. She was a symbol, a figure representing dignity in a world too often dominated by arrogance. People shared stories of moments in their own lives when they had been dismissed, underestimated, or belittled, and they attached Crockett's victory to their personal triumphs. Parents posted about explaining resilience to their children. College students tweeted about the courage to speak up in classrooms. Immigrant communities celebrated what her composure represented, a reminder that voices often ignored could not only survive, but rise to command attention and respect. Even some of Peterson's most vocal critics, those who didn't always align with Crockett, acknowledged the impact. Analysts dissected the moment on television, on podcasts, in written opinion pieces. They described his expression, the faltering jaw, the brief stammer, the rare loss of composure, as uncharacteristic for someone so polished. Columnists marveled at the irony. A man whose career was built on dissecting others' flaws had just been exposed by the unflinching clarity of a single woman and the power of her evidence. The ripple effect spread beyond politics. Celebrities and influencers began amplifying the moment, sharing clips and commentary, lending their massive platforms to the story. Journalists debated its implications, not just for the individuals involved, but for public discourse as a whole. Political voices weighed in, using Crockett's triumph as an example of leadership grounded in truth, courage, and preparation. The conversation shifted from partisan lines to a broader cultural narrative: dignity, skill, and proof versus arrogance and performance. And yet, even amidst the virality, the laughter, and the praise, there was a sense of something deeper simmering beneath the surface. The recording itself became more than a viral clip. It became a touchstone, a reminder that words carry weight long after they are spoken. Analysts debated the ethics, the accountability, the precedents it set for public debate. Every replay reinforced a lesson that had gone beyond one exchange. Authority cannot hide behind performance, and arrogance will always leave traces that truth can expose. The online community thrived on dissecting the moment. Memes highlighted Peterson's stumbles, while threads celebrated Crockett's composure. Users noted every pause, every deliberate choice she made, connecting them to her personal story of struggle, resilience, and service. Fans shared clips with captions like "Dignity always wins" and "Proof beats smirks every time." Videos of classroom reenactments, commentary breakdowns, and analysis streams piled up, creating a feedback loop that amplified her victory far beyond the chamber itself. But even as the hashtags trended, even as the memes flooded feeds, and even as the pundits debated for hours, there remained a quieter, more profound resonance. It was not in the sound bites or the viral loops, but in the moment's reminder that truth has longevity. Public opinion shifts and viral trends fade, but the moral clarity of standing firm, of using evidence over theatrics, and of confronting arrogance with calm, reasoned authority, those lessons endure. The chamber, the clips, the applause, they were all the surface. But beyond the viral memes, the deeper meaning of that recording would outlive the headlines. 8. The resolution as the echoes of Peterson's stammer faded and the chamber slowly regained its composure. Jasmine Crockett rose, not with triumph in her voice, but with the quiet authority of someone who understood the weight of what had just transpired. She reframed the moment for everyone listening, every journalist watching, every viewer witnessing from afar. "This isn't about me versus him," she said, her tone calm but unwavering. "It's about truth versus arrogance, service versus ego, dignity versus dismissal." Her words hung in the air like a bridge, connecting the spectacle in the chamber to the lived experiences of millions who had been belittled or underestimated. In that single sentence, Crockett transformed what had seemed like a personal confrontation into a universal lesson. The clash between herself and Peterson became symbolic, a narrative larger than the two people in the room. It was a story about integrity standing firm, about evidence overpowering pretense, about voices long ignored finally being heard. Crockett's story, now entwined with this defining moment, resonated far beyond the chamber. It wasn't just that she had exposed hypocrisy. It was that she had done so without losing composure, without yielding to anger, without becoming the version of the antagonist she had just defeated. Her resilience wasn't performative. It was authentic, born of years of sacrifice, of fighting in courtrooms for tenants and workers, of navigating the halls of power with unshakable purpose. Each word, each pause, each deliberate action reinforced the narrative. Representation matters, preparation matters, and courage grounded in principle matters most of all. The lesson was clear. Arrogance thrives only when met with submission. When arrogance is confronted with dignity, it falters. When ego is faced with evidence, it crumbles. Crockett's victory was not simply in silencing Peterson. It was in demonstrating that strength is measured not by volume or bravado, but by patience, composure, and an unwavering commitment to truth. For every viewer watching, every commentator dissecting the encounter, the message was undeniable. The world may try to undervalue you, but authenticity, preparation, and perseverance always carry weight. Her victory also carried the power of representation. Crockett's presence in that chamber symbolized more than personal achievement. It was a statement to communities often dismissed or underestimated. Your voice matters. Your lived experience matters. Your courage to stand, even when the odds are stacked against you, matters. And in that recognition, millions of viewers found validation, not just in her words, but in their own potential to confront adversity with integrity. Crockett's cadence slowed slightly as she delivered the emotional climax of her address. "The recording may have ended Peterson's argument," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "But the echo of my words will outlast his insult. Because truth endures, because service endures, because dignity endures." Each syllable carried resonance, a testament to the principle that arrogance, no matter how loud, cannot outlive the quiet force of moral clarity. In those moments, the chamber understood something profound. Peterson's brilliance, previously intimidating, was revealed to be conditional, effective only when unchallenged. Crockett's steadfastness had exposed the vulnerability hidden behind intellect. The applause that followed, whether overt or internalized, was recognition of more than a single debate. It was recognition of a universal principle, that standing firm in truth and service is a victory that extends far beyond any immediate confrontation. For audiences everywhere, the moral was unmistakable. Life will confront you with arrogance, with dismissive voices, with people who try to belittle or undermine you. But dignity, preparation, and unwavering commitment to truth are the tools that allow you to rise above. Crockett's performance was not just a rebuttal. It was a masterclass in how to wield these tools effectively, inspiring others to meet their own challenges with courage and composure. As the room slowly exhaled and the cameras captured the final moments of the exchange, one thought lingered. Arrogance may roar, but it cannot last. Service, integrity, and truth carry a resonance far beyond the initial clash. Crockett had proven it. And in doing so, she transformed a single confrontation into a timeless lesson for all who would listen, reminding the world that the power of dignity is not just in surviving adversity, but in triumphing over it with grace. 9. Outro that he called her unfit. But history will remember the day Jasmine Crockett proved she was more than ready, not just to sit in that chamber, but to confront arrogance with unshakable dignity and undeniable truth. In a moment that could have been just another clash of personalities, she transformed it into a lesson for the ages. That credibility is earned through service, integrity, and preparation, and that no smirk, no insult, no performance can override those qualities. Arrogance, as Peterson learned, may roar, but it cannot endure. Dignity, patience, and moral clarity carry a resonance that outlives fleeting attacks. Crockett's calm, calculated response reminded everyone watching that strength is not in volume or intimidation, but in standing firm, in letting truth speak for itself. She didn't just defend her place, she elevated it, turning an attempted belittlement into a symbol of resilience and representation that will inspire generations. If you believe truth should always silence arrogance, share this video. Let the world see that courage grounded in integrity is more powerful than any momentary display of dominance. If you value voices that speak for the people, voices that rise from struggle and service, subscribe and join the movement, because voices like Jasmine Crockett's must never be silenced. The chamber may have fallen silent after the confrontation, and Peterson may have had nothing left to say, but the impact of that moment will echo far beyond the walls. The insult has faded, but the recording will echo forever, reminding all of us that truth, dignity, and courage are the forces that endure long after arrogance has been forgotten. Chong Ding Don Chong A Don.